Forced to wed a 40-year-old alpha at 18, the Omega never expected the love she found. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Elena Harper was 18 years old when the word marriage stopped sounding like a future and started feeling like a sentence, and she heard it in the council hall where the air always smelled of old wood and quiet judgment, where the elders spoke softly and decisions landed heavy, where no one ever asked an Omega how she felt before deciding what she was worth. She stood with her hands folded, eyes lowered the way she had been taught, listening as her grandfather's voice shook just enough to give him away, listening as the ancient law was recited like a prayer that saved everyone except the one it named, listening as the room avoided her gaze as if looking at her might make the choice harder. The pack was failing, they said. Winter stores were thin, alliances were fragile, debts had piled like snow against the doors, and the only thing powerful enough to stop the collapse was a binding union with Marcus Blackwood, the Alpha King whose name carried weight far beyond their borders, the 40-year-old ruler known for restraint, distance, and a life shaped by duty rather than comfort. Elena felt the number settle into her chest like a stone. 40, twice her age, and then some, a life already lived, a world she had never seen, and she wondered how something could be legal, necessary, and still feel so profoundly unfair. No one spoke of romance. No one promised happiness. They spoke of protection, stability, safety for the pack, and when the elder finally said her name, Elena Harper, Omega of the Willow Creek Pack, she lifted her chin because fear had never saved anyone she loved. She thought of her younger cousins running through fields in summer, of her grandmother's hands braiding her hair by the window, of the way the pack relied on one another even when they pretended not to notice the quiet girls who made themselves small, and she realized that saying no would not make her braver, it would only make her alone. The Alpha King would arrive at dawn, the elders said. The ceremony would be simple, the law would be satisfied, and afterward Elena would be taken to Blackwood territory where she would be provided for and left undisturbed, a phrase that echoed in her mind with strange comfort and sharper fear. She did not cry, not then, because tears felt like something she could not afford, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady enough to surprise them all as she said she understood, that she accepted, that she would do her duty, and in that moment she believed the story would end where it began, with sacrifice quietly swallowed, and life moving on without ever asking what love might have looked like if she had been allowed to choose. The hours between the council's decision and dawn passed with a strange, suspended quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath, and Elena Harper moved through her family home like a guest who had already said goodbye. She packed only what was asked of her, a small case with simple dresses, sturdy shoes, and the worn sweater her grandmother insisted she take, because winters in Blackwood territory were colder and the stone halls held their chill. Everyone spoke gently to her, too gently, and that kindness hurt more than anger would have, because it told her they already believed she was gone. When the sun finally began to rise, pale and uncertain over the trees, the sound of approaching engines echoed down the gravel road, low and steady, nothing rushed or threatening, just the arrival of something inevitable. Elena stepped outside with her grandfather beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder, and saw the Blackwood convoy come to a careful stop a respectful distance from the house. There were no banners, no show of dominance, only two dark vehicles and a driver who stepped out first, nodding politely as if arriving for a business meeting rather than a binding that would change a young woman's life. Then Marcus Blackwood emerged, tall and composed, his dark coat buttoned against the cold, his presence quiet but undeniable, and Elena was struck not by fear, but by how still he seemed, as though he carried his authority without ever needing to display it. He did not look 40 in the way she had imagined, not worn or sharp, but settled, like someone who had learned the weight of responsibility and chosen to stand straight beneath it. When his eyes met hers, there was no hunger there, no assessment that made her feel smaller, only a steady regard that acknowledged her as a person rather than a price. He greeted her grandfather first, voice low and clear, thanking him for the meeting, for the trust, for the early hour. And then he turned to Elena and inclined his head, not a bow, but a gesture that felt deliberate. "You do not owe me anything beyond what the law requires," he said, and his words surprised her more than the situation itself. The ceremony was brief, held under the open sky because Elena had asked for it that way, her voice barely above a whisper when she made the request, and Marcus had agreed without hesitation. There were witnesses, signatures, a few formal words spoken with care, and then it was done. No spectacle, no claims made aloud, no hand placed possessively at her back. When it was over, Marcus stepped back, giving her space, and said that she could take her time saying goodbye, that nothing would begin until she was ready to leave. Elena hugged her grandfather tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of home, and when she turned back, Marcus was waiting where she had left him, hands at his sides, gaze turned politely away. The drive to Blackwood territory was quiet, the road stretching mile after mile beneath a wide sky, and Elena watched the landscape change through the window, forests giving way to open land, then rising stone walls that marked the edge of a place she had never imagined belonging to. When they arrived, the estate was vast but orderly, more fortress than palace, and as she stepped inside, Marcus spoke again, his voice steady as he told her that she would have her own rooms, her own schedule, and her own choices, and that nothing would be expected of her beyond what she freely gave. Elena nodded, unsure what to do with the unexpected relief spreading through her chest, because no one had warned her that the most unsettling part of being given away was discovering that the man she had been forced to marry intended to give her something back, something that looked very much like safety. Life inside Blackwood Estate settled into a rhythm Elena had not expected, one defined less by command and more by quiet structure, and in the days that followed her arrival, she learned the shape of the place through observation rather than instruction. Her rooms were spacious but modestly furnished, warm stone floors, tall windows that let in the pale northern light, and a small sitting area where a fire was lit each evening without her having to ask. No one entered without knocking, no one hurried her, and meals appeared at regular hours as if the household itself understood that she was still finding her footing. Marcus Blackwood remained a distant presence at first, not absent but careful, as though proximity itself required consent, and when they crossed paths it was always brief and respectful. A greeting in the corridor, a nod at the long dining table, where he sat at one end and she at the other, the space between them intentional rather than cold. Elena noticed how the staff moved around him, not with fear but with confidence, their interactions efficient and calm, and she realized that whatever stories had followed him beyond these walls did not fully belong here. On the third morning, she rose early and wandered into the east wing by accident, drawn by the sound of footsteps and low voices, and found Marcus reviewing documents at a long table, sleeves rolled neatly, glasses resting low on his nose, the image so unexpectedly ordinary that she stopped short. He looked up immediately, recognition softening his expression, and asked if she had slept well, the question simple and unforced. When she nodded, unsure what else to say, he gestured to the chair across from him and asked if she would like breakfast there instead of the main hall, explaining that he preferred quieter mornings and that she was welcome to join him or not, entirely her choice. Elena sat, surprised by how easily the decision came, and they ate in companionable silence broken only by small observations about the weather, the long winter ahead, the way the estate shifted with the seasons. He did not ask her questions that felt invasive, did not pry into her past, or make assumptions about her comfort, and when she finally spoke about missing her family, he listened without interrupting, acknowledging the loss without offering hollow reassurance. As the days passed, Elena began to notice patterns that contradicted everything she had been told. The way Marcus ensured her name was included in decisions that affected the household, the way he redirected conversations when visitors referred to her as a bargaining piece rather than a person, the way he corrected them calmly, firmly, without ever raising his voice. Once, when a visiting alpha spoke too casually about her youth, Marcus ended the discussion with a single measured sentence that made it clear the subject was closed, and Elena felt something steady in her chest, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. At night, She walked the stone balconies and watched the moon rise over the distant forest, aware of his presence somewhere in the estate, but never feeling watched, and she realized that fear had begun to loosen its grip, replaced by a cautious curiosity she had not planned for. Marcus did not touch her, did not crowd her space, and when she asked him one evening why, his answer was simple and unwavering. Because consent mattered, because duty did not excuse disregard, because she deserved time. Elena carried those words with her as she learned the estate, as she learned him through the small things, his habit of pausing to listen fully before responding, his preference for early mornings, the way his expression softened almost imperceptibly when he spoke of protecting his people. She had arrived believing herself a sacrifice, a solution to a problem too large to fight, and yet each passing day revealed a truth she had not been prepared for, that Marcus Blackwood did not see her as something taken, but as someone entrusted to his care, and that understanding shifted the ground beneath her feet in ways she could not yet name. By the end of the first week, Elena understood that the most difficult part of her new life was not fear but uncertainty, because nothing had unfolded the way she had braced herself for, and that absence of threat left space for questions she had never allowed herself to ask. One evening, as snow began to fall in slow, quiet sheets beyond the windows, Marcus invited her to walk the inner courtyard, a sheltered space warmed by stone walls and soft lantern light, and he spoke with the same measured calm she had come to recognize as deliberate. He told her that the council would expect a formal announcement of unity soon, that appearances mattered beyond the estate, but that within these walls, her comfort came first, and when she asked what that truly meant, he stopped walking and faced her fully, giving her his complete attention. It meant, he said, that nothing would be taken from her, not time, not trust, not affection, and that if she chose distance, it would be respected, and if she chose closeness, it would be earned. Elena listened, the cold air filling her lungs, and realized that this was the first vow that mattered, not one spoken under law, but one made quietly between two people standing on equal ground. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by the fire in her sitting room, staring at the steady flames, thinking about how little control she had believed she possessed, and how carefully Marcus had returned it piece by piece, without ceremony. When she heard a soft knock, she was not startled, only curious, and when she opened the door, Marcus stood a respectful distance away, coat draped over his arm, expression serious but not severe. He said he had noticed her light was still on, and wanted to check that she was well, nothing more, and when she invited him in, he remained near the doorway, as if crossing the threshold required permission even now. They spoke for a long while, about practical things at first, the coming winter, her interests, the books she had brought with her, and then, more quietly, about expectations, about how the world would look at them, about how she worried people would assume she had been bought, that her voice would be dismissed before she spoke. Marcus listened, his jaw tightening slightly, not with anger but with resolve, and he told her that if anyone spoke over her, they would answer to him, and that his role was not to replace her voice, but to amplify it until it could no longer be ignored. Elena felt the weight of that promise settle around her, not heavy but grounding, and when she admitted that she was afraid of disappointing him simply by being herself, Marcus surprised her by shaking his head and saying that disappointment only came from expectation, and he expected nothing she was not willing to give. Before he left, he asked if she needed anything for the night, anything at all, and when she said no, he thanked her for her honesty and stepped back into the hall, closing the door with care. Alone again, Elena realized that the vow she had spoken at the ceremony had been filled with fear, but the one she was beginning to form now, slowly and privately, was built on something else entirely, a growing sense that safety could exist without surrender, that respect could be offered without demand, and that love, if it came, would do so not as a consequence of obligation but as a choice neither of them was ready to name yet, but both were beginning to understand. Living beside Marcus without truly living with him became its own quiet test, because the distance he maintained was not absence but restraint, and Elena began to understand that choosing not to cross a boundary required as much intention as crossing one. Days turned into weeks, marked by small routines that slowly stitched her into the fabric of Blackwood Estate. Morning walks through the gardens wrapped in frost, Afternoons spent reading near tall windows. Evenings where she sometimes joined Marcus for dinner and sometimes chose solitude without explanation or consequence. He never questioned her choices, never treated her independence as a challenge, and that freedom felt unfamiliar enough to be unsettling. Elena noticed how Marcus adjusted the world around her in subtle ways, scheduling meetings so they would not intrude on her time, ensuring visitors were briefed on her position as his wife rather than a political solution, insisting she be addressed directly rather than spoken about. And though he never announced these actions, she felt their impact in the way conversations shifted when she entered a room. Yet uncertainty lingered, because kindness could be misread, and Elena worried that what felt like safety now might only be patience waiting to expire. One afternoon, she overheard a visiting council member remark that the Union had stabilized the region as expected, and the word expected echoed in her mind long after the visitor had left, stirring old fears she thought she had laid to rest. That evening, she confronted Marcus not with accusation but with honesty, asking him if there would come a day when he regretted the choice he had been forced to make, when duty would outweigh consideration. Marcus did not answer immediately, and the pause made her heart race. But when he spoke, his voice was steady and certain as he said that obligation had brought them together, but regret had never entered his mind, because he did not see her as a burden he carried, but as a responsibility he honored. He explained that leadership had taught him the difference between control and protection, and that the latter required listening, patience, and the willingness to stand back when stepping forward would do harm. Elena listened, searching his expression for signs of performance or strategy, but found only quiet truth, and for the first time she allowed herself to consider that what lay between them was not an imbalance waiting to tip, but a foundation being carefully built. Later that night, a storm moved in, wind pressing against the stone walls, thunder distant but persistent, and Elena found herself unsettled by the noise, memories of fragile winters resurfacing despite the strength of the estate around her. She hesitated outside Marcus's study before knocking, uncertain whether asking for company would change the nature of the space they had created, but when he opened the door and saw her standing there, he simply stepped aside and invited her in without comment. They sat together in comfortable silence as the storm passed, not touching, not speaking much, just sharing the same room, and Elena realized how rare it was to feel accompanied without expectation. As the thunder faded and calm returned, Marcus asked if she felt more at ease, and when she nodded, he smiled faintly and said that was enough. When she returned to her rooms later, Elena understood that the greatest tension between them was no longer fear of what he might demand, but uncertainty over what she might want, because living with a man who offered respect instead of dominance forced her to confront the possibility that she was no longer surviving, but slowly, unexpectedly, beginning to belong. The truth revealed itself gradually, not through confession but through moments that could not be staged, and Elena realized that understanding Marcus meant paying attention to what he carried quietly rather than what he chose to explain. It happened on a late afternoon when the estate prepared for a regional meeting, visitors expected by evening, and Elena noticed Marcus favoring his left side as he moved through the corridor, his posture still composed but his breathing just slightly off rhythm. When she asked if he was unwell, he dismissed it gently, calling it an old ache, but something in his expression told her it was more than discomfort, and later, when the house settled into pre-evening calm, she found him alone in the small conservatory, seated with his coat draped carefully beside him, eyes closed as if concentrating on staying present. She hesitated, then crossed the space and asked again, more quietly this time, and Marcus opened his eyes and regarded her for a long moment before answering. He said that leadership aged differently than years did, that 40 did not mark the passage of time so much as the accumulation of responsibility, of decisions made with no perfect outcome, of losses absorbed without ceremony. When Elena sat beside him without touching, simply sharing the bench, he continued, telling her that his youth had been spent in preparation rather than freedom, that he had taken on command long before he felt ready, and that the years people counted against him were years shaped by duty rather than choice. He spoke of a previous bond formed under different circumstances, one rooted in alliance rather than affection, and though he did not dwell on its ending, Elena understood that it had taught him the cost of confusing obligation with connection. She listened, not interrupting, aware that what he offered now was not justification but context, and when he paused, she realized he was waiting not for forgiveness but for understanding. Elena told him that she had been afraid of his age because it had seemed like proof that her life was already decided, that the difference between them would erase her before she had a chance to grow, and Marcus nodded, accepting the truth of that fear without defending himself. He said that if time had given him anything, it was restraint, the ability to wait rather than take, to protect rather than possess, and that if she ever felt overshadowed by his experience, he wanted her to say so, because partnership required adjustment on both sides. The honesty of the exchange shifted something between them, a subtle realignment that made the space feel warmer without changing its boundaries, and when they stood to rejoin the household, Elena noticed that his steps were steadier, as if the act of being seen had eased the weight he carried. That evening, during the meeting, Elena watched Marcus from across the room, observing how he listened more than he spoke, how he guided discussion without dominating it, how he deferred to expertise rather than authority when it served the group, and she recognized that his strength lay not in force but in consistency. Later, as the guests departed and the estate quieted once more, Elena realized that her perception of age had begun to change, that 40 no longer felt like a wall separating them, but like a foundation beneath him, one built through endurance rather than entitlement. She found herself wondering what it might mean to grow alongside someone who did not rush her forward or hold her back, someone who allowed her to arrive at understanding on her own terms. As she prepared for sleep that night, Elena acknowledged a truth she had not planned for, that knowing Marcus as he truly was did not make her feel smaller, but steadier, and that the love she had never expected might begin not with passion or promise, but with the quiet courage it took for two people to be honest about who they were and who they were still becoming. The challenge came not from within Blackwood Estate, but from beyond its walls, carried in by familiar voices that belonged to a past Elena had not expected to face so soon. And when word arrived that representatives from Willow Creek Pack had requested an audience, her chest tightened with a mix of hope and unease. Marcus informed her first, not as a formality but as a choice, explaining who had come, why they claimed urgency, and asking whether she wished to see them at all, a question that reminded her how far she had traveled from the girl who once stood silent in a council hall. Elena agreed, believing that avoidance would only deepen old wounds, and when the meeting was arranged, she entered the receiving chamber with her shoulders back, Marcus beside her but not ahead, his presence steady rather than shielding. The delegation wasted little time, their words polished with concern and gratitude, speaking of how the alliance had saved the region, how Elena's sacrifice had stabilized their borders, how fortunate she was to be well housed and protected, and with each sentence, Elena felt herself reduced again to an object of transaction. When one of them suggested that her duty to Willow Creek did not end with marriage, that further expectations might arise if circumstances shifted, the room went quiet, and Elena felt Marcus stiffen beside her, not in anger but in resolve. Before she could speak, he addressed them calmly, reminding them that Elena was his wife by law and by choice, that she owed no further payment to any pack, and that any discussion of obligation would be directed to him alone. The delegate attempted to recover, suggesting that Elena herself might wish to assist her former people, but Marcus turned to her then, openly, asking her what she wanted, and the question echoed through the chamber with unexpected power. Elena answered honestly, saying that she cared for her family and hoped for their well-being, but that she would not be used as leverage again, that her choices were her own now, and her voice did not waver as she spoke. The delegates left soon after, their courtesy intact but their expectations dismantled, and when the doors closed behind them, Elena exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. Marcus did not praise her or reassure her. He simply asked if she was all right, and when she nodded, he told her he was proud of the clarity she had shown, not because it aligned with his interests, but because it honored her autonomy. That evening, news traveled quickly through the region, whispers shifting tone as word spread that the Alpha King had publicly rejected the idea of an Omega as currency, and Elena sensed the weight of that stance, not as protection alone, but as declaration. As they walked the halls later, Elena admitted that she had feared Marcus might resent the complication, that defending her could invite political strain, and he replied that leadership was meaningless if it demanded silence from those it claimed to protect. He told her that he had chosen to stand with her not as an act of authority, but as an affirmation of partnership, and that choice, once made, was not something he would revisit. That night, Elena stood at the window, watching the moon climb above the forest, aware that the world beyond the estate had shifted its perception of her, and more importantly, that she had shifted her own. She had been sent away as an offering, but she now stood as a woman whose voice carried weight, supported not by obligation but by respect, and she understood that whatever lay ahead, the bond forming between her and Marcus was no longer shaped by necessity alone, but by a shared refusal to let her be diminished again. The days that followed the confrontation settled into a stillness that felt different from before, not tentative but anticipatory, as if something unspoken had reached the surface and was waiting to be acknowledged. Elena noticed how the household adjusted almost instinctively, how conversations paused when she entered not out of caution but respect, how decisions once filtered through layers now arrived with her included, and she understood that the shift was not symbolic but real. One evening, Marcus asked if she would walk with him beyond the inner grounds, a path rarely used except for reflection, and when she agreed, they moved side by side beneath a sky clear enough to reveal countless stars. He did not begin with formality or explanation, only with honesty, telling her that the alliance was secure, that her former pack would not be permitted to pressure her again, and that if she wished to visit them in the future, the choice would be hers alone. Elena listened, feeling the weight of that freedom, and then Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression composed but intent. He told her that while the law recognized their bond, he wanted to speak beyond law, that what they had built could not remain undefined forever without becoming something hollow, and that clarity mattered as much as care. He said that if she wished to leave, to return to a life unbound by his name, he would ensure her safety and standing, that no debt would follow her, and that the door would remain open without resentment. The words stunned her, not because she wanted to go, but because no one had ever placed an ending in her hands before. Elena searched his face for hesitation and found none, only resolve shaped by respect, and in that moment she understood that love, if it was to exist between them, had to be chosen freely, not grown in the shadow of obligation. She told him that she had once believed survival was the highest goal she could reach, that peace was something other people earned, but that living beside him had shown her a different possibility, one where her voice mattered and her presence was not a burden. She admitted that she was afraid of naming her feelings because doing so made them vulnerable, but that fear no longer outweighed truth. Marcus listened without interrupting, his posture still, his attention absolute, and when she finished, he asked her one final question, whether she stayed because she felt safe or because she wanted to build something with him. Elena answered without hesitation that safety had opened the door, but choice had kept her there, and that she wanted a partnership defined by patience, honesty, and time. Marcus reached out then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he took her hand, not as a claim but as an offering, his grip warm and steady. He told her that he did not need possession to feel secure, that he had waited many years to stand beside someone who chose him without fear, and that if she accepted, he would walk with her at her pace, not ahead and never behind. They stood there for a long moment, hands joined, the world quiet around them, and Elena felt the weight of her past loosen, replaced by a certainty she had never expected to find in a life that began with sacrifice. When they returned to the estate, nothing outward had changed, yet everything had, because the bond between them was no longer a question of law or duty, but a mutual decision, reaffirmed not by ceremony, but by the quiet understanding that they had both chosen to stay. Spring arrived quietly in Blackwood territory, not with celebration but with subtle change, snow retreating from the stone paths, sunlight lingering longer in the halls, and Elena realizing that the estate now felt less like a place she occupied and more like a home she shaped. Her presence had become woven into daily life, not as an emblem or obligation, but as a steady influence, her opinions sought, her comfort considered, her laughter occasionally heard in spaces once defined only by formality. When the regional council convened again, this time within Blackwood walls, Elena stood beside Marcus by choice rather than expectation, and the difference was felt immediately. The room attentive not because of his authority alone, but because of the unity they carried without display. Marcus introduced her not as a symbol of alliance, but as his partner, acknowledging her insight into community welfare, her understanding of interpack dynamics, and the respect she had earned through quiet strength. Elena spoke when it mattered, her voice clear and assured, and as she did, she felt the final remnants of her former fear dissolve, replaced by confidence grounded not in position but in belonging. After the council departed, leaving behind agreements built on cooperation rather than coercion, Elena walked the familiar corridors and reflected on how far she had traveled from the girl who once believed her worth lay solely in what she could give up. Marcus joined her in the garden that evening, where new growth pushed through thawed soil, and he told her that the council's response had confirmed what he already knew, that leadership was strongest when shared with someone who challenged him to listen more deeply and act more thoughtfully. Elena smiled, recognizing the man beside her not as a distant alpha or reluctant husband, but as a partner who valued her presence beyond any role she filled. In the weeks that followed, she visited Willow Creek Pack on her own terms, greeted not as an offering returned, but as a woman who had forged her own path. And when she came back to Blackwood Estate, it was with a sense of completion rather than escape. One evening, as they stood together watching the horizon shift into dusk, Marcus asked her if she ever wished the past had unfolded differently, and Elena considered the question carefully before answering that while she would never wish fear on her younger self, she no longer wished away the journey, because it had led her to a life defined by choice rather than sacrifice. Marcus nodded, understanding that acceptance did not mean approval of what had been taken, but appreciation for what had been built despite it. As the season turned fully, Elena was acknowledged publicly as Luna, not through spectacle or declaration, but through consistent respect, through the way people listened when she spoke, through the way Marcus looked to her instinctively, and through the way she carried herself with assurance earned rather than granted. Standing at the heart of Blackwood Estate one quiet morning, Elena realized that love had not arrived as a sudden revelation, but as a series of decisions made with care, patience, and mutual regard. She had been forced into a marriage meant to save others, yet she had found within it a life that saved her, not by erasing her past, but by giving her the space to become someone she had never imagined she could be. And as she reached for Marcus's hand, confident in the future they would continue to choose together, she understood that true strength was gentle, and that love, when freely given, had the power to transform even the most unexpected beginnings into something enduring and whole.